You know, a lot of times people don't realize what they have, and I want to thank my brother for leading singing this morning. That brought back, I sat there almost wanting to cry, because that brought back a lot of memories. I'm a lot older than you might think. In April, I'll be 78. And so I'm not quite with my brother yet, I don't think. But I am moving a lot slower than I did. But a lot of you probably don't understand what I'm talking about. But the heartfelt, the sincerity, the emotion of the song leading this morning, I really appreciate. What an amazing congregation to have so many different song leaders. And I'm sure I've only heard two of them, but both of them been good, but both of them been different. They have their own style, if you want to call it that. But you have a treasure, and I hope you understand that and appreciate it. It's kind of a step back in time, but thank you, brother. Thank you. It got my mind off what I came to talk about. So I'm going to start my clock, as I promised you last week. I don't know if you noticed, and I don't mean to make a big deal out of this, but last Sunday I stopped less than 25 minutes, and I will do the same today, I hope. So we'll see what happens, okay? All right, so good morning. Thank you for being here. I saw a lot of people that weren't here last week. And if we get the people that were here last week that aren't here today, and the people that are here next week, we're going to have a whole big crowd. It's going to be great. So last week I talked about the joy of being a Christian. And I learned over the years that every time I talk about that, usually somebody will come up to me or send me a text or maybe even a note or something and say, well, Brother Dave, I appreciate that, but you just don't understand what I'm going through. And it's really hard to have joy in this circumstance. And I get that. And I don't want you to think that everything is blue skies and rainbows. Everything isn't. And that's kind of the point of the lesson last week, and the point of the lesson this week follows up on that. So where's the joy? In the scripture we had this morning in Matthew chapter 5, it says he causes it to rain on the just and the unjust. Now, it's interesting to me that comes in the same context where he tells us to love our enemies. And I think what he's really kind of telling us here is, in this world, in many ways, there's not that much difference between us in Christ and those out of Christ. And so we need to have a compassion and a sympathy for them. And what I want to do this morning, first of all, I want to tell you the lesson this morning. I want to give you hope. I want it to be... I want you to leave here understanding there is a difference, and it's a significant difference. Even though the same things may be happening to us that happen to those in the world, there's a tremendous difference, and that difference makes all the difference, and I want you to understand that. When I talked about joy last week, I talked about it in the sense of that we can have this joy. And I didn't spend a lot of time on it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it today. But there is a difference between joy and happiness. I want to give you a quick illustration. A few years ago, my son went to buy a car with a friend, and it ended up being a robbery. And as they were going to make the deal, a guy pulled out a gun and said, "Give me the money." Well, my son's friend, is ex-military. He had his gun with him, so he pulled his gun out and basically said, "I'm not giving you my money." And what ended up happening is they both got shot. He got shot in the hand and couldn't pull the trigger on his gun. My son got shot 3 times and almost cost him his life. We get a phone call Sunday afternoon, and my granddaughter-in-law, or step-granddaughter said, "Nana, you need to be calm. That's never a good way to start a conversation." And she said, "Matt's been shot, and he's at the hospital." And my wife said, "Is he alive?" And she said, "I don't know." And so we get in the car and we quickly drive to Pine Bluff, Arkansas. In Arkansas, they call it Crime Bluff, and there's a reason for that. And as we're driving along, I said to my wife, I said, "You know what?" I said, "This is horrible, but there are 2 things I want us to remember. Number one, as far as we can humanly understand, Matthew is in a right place with God. And number two, because of all the crime down there, they probably have a really good trauma center. He was shot a mile from the hospital. They got him to the hospital. The doctor that worked on him had been a military doctor and really knew about gunshot wounds. And after 7 hours of surgery, he comes out to the waiting room and he says to us, all his wounds are survivable. Now, am I happy? Absolutely not. Do I have joy? Absolutely. Not just because his wounds are survivable, but it reminded me all of a sudden, what a powerful sermon. All of our wounds are survivable. All the self-inflicted sinful wounds that we have in our life are survivable because of what God has done. So this morning, I want us to take a quick look at 5 real things that happen in people's lives that we can survive and that we will look at differently than the world does because we walk with Christ. Number one, it's amazing. Doug had no idea, I don't think, what I was going to talk about this morning. But the first one I want to talk about is betrayal. That's a wound that hurts. And that's a wound that doesn't go away very fast. In betrayal, I want us to look at the story of Joseph, beginning in Genesis chapter 37 and actually going all the way to chapter 45. And I don't have time to read it all, but I'm going to give you a little bit of this story. Joseph is a 17-year young man. He's been favored by his father, which really didn't serve him too well, and his brothers hate him. And you know the story. The plot was the brothers decided to kill him. He goes to see his brothers. They beat up on him. They're contemplating killing their brother. You know, people grow up in all kinds of family situations. And this is a bad one. This 17-year-old suffered at the hands of his family. And I know in an audience this size, there are some of you that suffered at the hands of the people who should have loved you. Well, they decide not to kill him, but they save him and sell him into slavery. He ends up getting a job with a man named Potiphar, and Potiphar's wives notice him. And it's kind of interesting. The NIV describes Joseph, and it said he was a young man, and he was handsome and well-built. And Potiphar's wife goes after him. This is sexual abuse. I know in an audience like this, some of you have been abused sexually. Some of you have been harassed sexually. Some of you had to keep your mouth shut and take it because you didn't feel like you could do anything else. That's what was happening to Joseph. And then she lies about it. Have you ever had anybody lie about you? Have you ever had anybody spread something that just simply wasn't true and there was no way for you to defend yourself? That's what happened to Joseph. And Joseph ends up going to prison. Now, while he's in prison, he's a model citizen and gets all kinds of accolades for the kind of person that he is. And while he's in prison, he interprets a dream for a man that was a cupbearer and a man that was a baker. And he interprets their dreams. One it didn't turn out too well for, but the other, he said, you're going to be released from prison. Please remember me. Oh, I'll remember you, I'll remember you. And then he doesn't. So he's in prison, a model citizen, hoping to get out. But the man betrays him and doesn't remember. Fast forward 13 years. Now this 17-year-old kid that suffered all these things in his youth, now he's an adult. He's 30 years old. He's the second in command of Egypt. And his brothers have to come and ask for food. Now think about this. For 13 years, he could have brooded, simmered, the bitterness, the anger, the desire for revenge that people live with who have been betrayed. And that's human, and I understand it. But because Joseph had a relationship with God, he handles the situation differently. He sees his brother, and rather than have hate, he has love and compassion. Rather than to seek revenge, he looks deeper into it and says, what was God doing? And he tells his brother, I think one of the most interesting statements in all the Bible. He said, this was God's will so that I could be here to save you. I'm not minimizing at all sometimes what's happened to us in our childhood. It will not go away. As I said, I'm almost 78 years old, and I still deal with things that happened in my childhood. It was not good. But the difference is, God has a purpose. The second thing I want us to look at is a little bit different. This one is personal. What I mean by that is a personal failure. It's on you. It's not something you can look around and blame somebody else. And the story I want to talk about is found in 2 Samuel chapter 11 and 12. And it's the story of David and Bathsheba. You know the story. David's in his palace and he's looking out. And here's a woman bathing. And he sees her and he has lust for her. Now, sometimes people tell me, well, it was Bathsheba's fault. She should never have been up there. I don't think that's fair to Bathsheba at all. It was very common. That's where they bathed, on their roof. They had high walls. She didn't expect anybody to be looking out there. That wasn't her purpose. She wasn't trying to lure somebody. But David saw her, and he lusted after her, and he sent somebody to find out about her, and they came back, and they said this, and I think it's very important. Yes, I found her. She's the daughter of Eliam, and she's the wife of Uriah. And I think what the messenger was doing is saying, David, think about this before you do this. That's somebody's daughter. That's somebody's wife. But David went ahead and sent for her anyway. And you know the story. She gets pregnant. And then he's desperately trying to cover up the pregnancy. And so eventually he actually has her husband killed. This is the David that is described after a man after God's own heart. It's a personal failure like hardly any of us probably have gone that far. But I'll guarantee almost all of us have some personal failure. Sometime where we just did not act as we should have. Sometimes when we disappointed ourselves, but more importantly, we disappointed our God. And everybody in the world almost everybody has something like that. But what makes the difference? You know the story later on. God sends a man named Nathan to David, and he tells him a story about a man who stole his neighbor's sheep. And David gets real indignant about it. David was really good at departmentalizing things. Yeah, he had done this horrible thing, but he was King David. He lived to a higher standard. And this man that stole the lamb, he should be punished. And you know the story. It's one of the most powerful stories. Nathan says, you are the man. Now, what would people in the regular world do that don't have God, don't have a relationship? They would have denied it. They would have blamed somebody. They would have turned all angry. Who are you to tell me? You've all seen it. But the difference is, David knew God. And you know what David did? Because he knew God to be a loving, forgiving, compassionate, caring God. David said, I have sinned against God. And what did God do? God forgave him and restored him. You see the difference? This is what I'm trying to help you to understand. See the difference? Was David happy about this stuff? No. But did he end up having joy? Yes. Why? Because he knew God and he had a relationship with God. Was Joseph happy that those things had happened to him? No. But did he end up with joy? Yes. Because he knew God had a purpose. The third one I want to talk about is those of you, and there's some in this audience I've been hearing as I've talked to people and listened to things and as announcements are made, that are dealing with chronic illnesses. Something that the doctor has said, there's nothing we can do. Some of you have dealt with it for years. Some of you have dealt with the pain, the inability to do the things you want to do, to be the person you want to be. And I think about Saul or Paul. And Paul tells us in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, I went to God, I went to him 3 times. God, please remove this. I'm dyslexic. Is that how you say it? I'll tell you what, I can't spell it. I'm not real bad like some people, but I was in that special class in grade school. You know what I'm talking about? It amazes me how many times, and this is an example of it here, God has put me in a church with engineers. I've learned to love them. But you know what I learned? I'm the kind of guy that gets an idea and I'm like, hey, let's do it. Engineers are the kind of guys that get an idea and say, how are we going to do that? They've actually made me a better preacher because I've learned that if I'm going to talk to engineers about one of my great ideas, let's do it, I better have a plan. We've all got something. Some of you go to the doctor every week. Some of you have treatments. Some of you have medicines. Some of you hurt all the time. What are you going to do? You see, when you go to the doctor, you're going to the doctor with the just and the unjust. There's people sitting in there that don't know God. There's people that are sitting in there that do know God. You know what Paul did? Paul said, I am going to use this to my and God's benefit. God has done this, and I'm paraphrasing, to keep me humble. Now, I'm going to describe Paul to you if he was living with us today. He was the homecoming king. Some want to say something else about Paul, but never know. Anyway, he was the homecoming king. He was the quarterback on the football team. He graduated valedictorian and was a Rhodes Scholar. And the Bible doesn't really describe him too much, but I bet he was handsome. Do you have somebody like that in your high school? Did you sometimes just... I can't say that. I called you jerks last week. I can't say what I was going to say. I don't think I did that, by the way. And if I did, I apologize. But this guy had everything. He actually came from a family that was very prosperous. But God gave him something to keep him humble, to remind him that without God, he was nothing. You see the difference between him with God and somebody without God? The next one I want to talk about, I want to make sure you understand where I'm coming from, because I think you can really be misunderstood about this, but the subject I want to talk about is depression. And I want to tell you before anything else, if you're suffering of real chronic depression, get help. There are medications that help. There's nothing wrong with taking a medication that God has provided to help us with something like that or any other thing. Depression is debilitating. I mean, it just weights us down. The person I want to talk about is Elijah. We think about Elijah. Elijah, he was great. He stood on Mount Carmel, and look what he did. Right after that, somebody put a contract out on him. Her name was Jezebel. And Elijah was so depressed by it, we find him hiding in a cave, whimpering, I'm the only one. Nobody understands. And it was real. Have you ever sat in your chair and closed all the blinds and turned out all the lights and just sat there? And you just couldn't hardly find the strength to get up, to do anything. Depression is real. But God spoke to Elijah. And first of all, he told him, get up and eat and get out of that cave. Get up and do something. That's one way to combat depression. And then God says, I am going to speak to you. He goes out and the wind is blowing like a storm. No God. There's an earthquake. No God. There's a fire. No God. And then there was a gentle whisper. And God came to the rescue of this man suffering depression. And he said, there are 7,000 others who have not bowed a knee. See the difference between those that have God and don't have God? How would you like to suffer with that depression and not have God? And the last one I want to talk about, I don't know exactly how to approach it. I had a dog. His name was Ziggy. Now, my wife and I have always had big dogs. When we lived here, we had a Mastiff that weighed 220 pounds. Our Mastiff died, and so we didn't have a dog for 3 years. About every Saturday, I would go to the pet store where they had the giveaway of the puppies. And I'd sit in that little metal thing, and I'd let the dogs lick my face, and I'd scratch their ears and rub their bellies. Oh, I miss my dog. One day I had my granddaughters with me, and we were going to a movie. We were a little bit early, so we went down to the pet store, and we petted the dogs, and there was this one dog. It just got to me, this big. 250-pound Mastiff. Now I've got a 7-pound dog. We went to the movie. The whole movie, I kept thinking about that dog. As soon as the movie was over, we went back to that pet store, and they literally had her in a crate, putting her in getting ready to put her in the truck to take her back to the shelter. And I said, no. 8 years later, I left the fence open. That dog went out, and it chased a car. And a woman and her daughter brought it up to our door and knocked on our door. Is this your dog? We rushed it to the hospital. They said, we can do some tests on it, but it's not going to make it. They said, well, put her down. Then the vet said, do you want to be with her? So I sat there and held my puppy's hand, and they gave it a shot. And I cried like a baby. Now I tell you that story because it's easier than telling you about my dad who died in his bed in his home that he had paid $7,000 for as he rolled over after my mom was changing his clothes. Or my brother who died 10 days later. You see, none of us is going to escape death. But God's the difference. I wrote this when my mother-in-law was dying, and I want to close with it. Tonight I'm sitting with my mother-in-law as she takes a journey from this world to the next. She cannot speak in the language of words. She communicates with body language and with the occasional sigh, moan, grunt, or humming. We call it purring. I'm trying to learn her new language so that I will know how to respond. It's a new and confusing conversation we are sharing. We speak in the language of soft touches, gently held hands, the brush of her hair, the pat on an aged hand. I believe she hears our feeble attempts to speak of our love and concern and compassion. I know we hear her as she communicates with her eyes, and her hand, a nod, a smile, a touch, or some other silent word that says, I'm ready. I'm ready. How precious is the sweet smile, how troubling the furrowed brow, how confusing the unknown groan. We listen with great interest as she speaks. Her gentle touch speaks loudly of her love for my wife and her sister. A mother's love needs no words. Her groans speak of pain, and we pray that God hears and will take her to the land of painless eternity. Her silent tears speak of a place where God will wipe them away and they will never be heard from again. Our silent, breaking hearts speak of wonderful memories and faith. How can one who's been silenced by Alzheimer's speak so eloquently and with such dignity? The nurses, the aides, the staff, the doctors have all listened to her silent message. They have seen her speak. As a mother, she continues to teach. May we all be reminded to talk less and speak more in smiles, twinkling eyes, holding of hands, laughter, and sweet touches that shout, I love you. May we learn to speak our Voca. That was her name. When she passed, Susan said, I realize more than ever we were not intended for this world. Joy. Maybe you're suffering from something today. It'll be easier if you let your brothers and sisters work it through with you. It'll be easier if you have God in your life. If you need to come, do so as we stand and sing.